I stood outside the coffee shop, my eyes glued to the window. Lisa, my wife, was in Chris's arms, their lips locked in a kiss that left no room for misunderstanding. The world around me seemed to fade away. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Everything I had trusted, everything I thought I knew about her, shattered in front of me. My heart pounded as I moved toward the door, my hand gripping the handle. I was going to confront them. But let me take you back to where it all started. It's funny how easy it is to overlook the small things when everything seems fine. For years, Lisa and I had a routine, one that felt like it couldn't be broken. We both worked hard, came home to the same small apartment, and shared quiet nights together. We'd make dinner, talk about our days, and then unwind in front of the TV before going to bed. It was comfortable, predictable, and safe. Lisa had always been the type of woman to crave routine. She had a list for everything: grocery shopping, meal planning, cleaning schedules. There was an order to everything she did, and I admired it. She was always organized, always on top of things, always there. That's what made the first cracks so hard to spot. They were subtle, like a small leak in a boat that eventually floods the entire thing. It started with the coffee. Lisa had always been a morning person, up before the sun, making her usual trip to the local cafe for her double shot of espresso. I never thought much of it, it was just part of her morning ritual. She loved that coffee shop, the grind, and the barista there, Chris, always knew exactly how she liked her coffee. The regulars at the shop knew her by name. I never saw the harm in it. At first, it seemed harmless, even cute. Lisa would talk about Chris's latest quips, how he remembered her order by heart, how they'd chat about this or that while she waited for her drink. I'd laugh, nod, and go about my day, thinking it was nothing more than the friendly banter you get in any neighborhood coffee shop. But then, it started to happen more frequently. I first noticed it one Saturday morning. I was still in bed, scrolling through my phone, when Lisa came rushing in, fully dressed in her usual work clothes. "I'm running late," she said, practically tripping over herself. "I'll grab coffee on my way, don't worry about it." It wasn't that she was in a rush, it was the way she acted. There was this subtle urgency in her voice, as though she needed to get out of the house as quickly as possible. The thing is, Lisa didn't usually rush. She liked to take her time. Yet here she was, racing out the door like she couldn't get to the grind fast enough. I shrugged it off, told myself I was overthinking it. But the pattern continued. It became clear that Lisa was spending more time at the grind, more than what seemed necessary. I tried not to pay it much attention, but one afternoon I happened to be walking home from work when I saw her, standing outside the cafe, laughing. She was with Chris. I didn't think much of it at first. They were talking, like two people who had known each other for a long time. But something in the way they were interacting caught my eye. Chris was leaning in slightly, his hand brushing against hers as they talked. Lisa, who always tried to maintain her composure, was laughing a little too hard at whatever joke he made. It wasn't anything inappropriate, not overly. But the way she looked at him, the way her eyes sparkled, felt different. It felt like something I wasn't supposed to see. Still, I brushed it off. I had no reason to believe anything was wrong. It was just a harmless friendship, right? After all, Lisa had always been sociable, always making friends with people wherever we went. Chris was just another one of those friendly faces, a part of her routine. But then came the nights she started staying later at work. It wasn't the first time Lisa had worked late. She was a marketing coordinator, after all, and sometimes the late nights came with the territory. But this felt different. She'd come home later and later, her face tense, her mood off. When I asked her how her day went, she'd give vague responses, nothing specific. And her phone? It started to get a little too protective. She'd always leave it lying around before. But now, she kept it with her, even when she showered. If I happened to walk by her when she was texting, she'd quickly minimize the screen or switch apps. I thought I was imagining it. People get protective of their phones all the time, right? But the more I thought about it, the more suspicious it became. There was a wall between us that hadn't been there before, and I couldn't figure out what had caused it. Something was off, and I couldn't put my finger on it. One evening, I decided to stop by the coffee shop. I wasn't sure why I did it, but I just had this nagging feeling that I needed to check it out. Maybe I could see for myself what Lisa and Chris had been talking about. So I walked in, ordering my usual, trying to act casual. Lisa wasn't there that day, but Chris was. He smiled as I walked up to the counter, his usual friendly demeanor in full swing. We exchanged pleasantries. I asked him how things were going, and he told me all the usual stuff, how busy the shop had been, the new drinks they were experimenting with. He didn't mention Lisa, not directly. But there was something in his eyes, a glimmer of recognition, that made me feel like he knew something I didn't. When I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their relationship than he was letting on. But again, I told myself I was overthinking it. I trusted Lisa. She was the love of my life. She wouldn't betray me, not like that. Right. But as the days wore on, that feeling only grew stronger. Something was wrong. I just didn't know how or why. The more I tried to ignore it, the more the cracks began to show. It's strange how subtle the first signs of betrayal are. They don't hit you like a sledgehammer. They creep in, little by little, until they've suffocated you from the inside. I remember feeling it first as a vague discomfort, like an itch I couldn't scratch. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, things were still fine between Lisa and me, right? At least, that's what I told myself. The first time I noticed something off was when she started staying later at work. I don't mean the occasional late night. Those happened from time to time, and I was used to it. But now it was different. The late nights were more frequent, and each time she'd come home, there was a distance in her eyes, a tiredness that didn't quite make sense. She'd greet me with a half-smile, and then retreat to the bedroom, her phone glued to her hand. It didn't take long before I realized that the late nights weren't just about work. She had started using the excuse of catching up on emails when I asked her what she'd been doing. The hours stretched, sometimes long past midnight, and when I would poke my head into the room to see how she was, she'd be sitting at her desk, typing away on her laptop with an intensity that seemed off. The truth is, I didn't know exactly why it felt off. It could have been the way she would jump at the sound of a notification pinging on her phone, or how she'd quickly close her laptop when I entered the room, as if she was hiding something. The small things began to pile up. The casual way she brushed off any mention of the grind, even though I knew she'd been there earlier in the day. The excuse that Chris was just being friendly. The repeated comments about how much she enjoyed their chats. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But then came the phone. It was a Tuesday evening when I first noticed it. I came home from a long day at work, tired and eager to relax. Lisa was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone out in front of her. It wasn't unusual for her to be on her phone. She loved keeping in touch with friends and family. But as I walked past, I saw the way she quickly minimized the screen when I approached. The phone was in her hand as if it were a lifeline, her thumb rapidly swiping as she looked up at me with a forced smile. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, her voice a little too bright. "Fine," I said, though something in my gut was starting to twist. I walked over to the fridge and grabbed a drink, trying not to make it obvious that I was watching her. It wasn't until I sat down that I realized the subtle change in her body language. She was holding her phone too tightly, as if it were her anchor to something I wasn't supposed to see. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," she replied quickly, as if it were the automatic answer. But I noticed the way she shifted in her seat. There was something in the way she couldn't meet my eyes. My mind raced, but I pushed it down. I didn't want to accuse her of something without evidence. I had no reason to suspect anything, right? But that night, as I lay in bed beside her, I felt it again, an unsettling distance between us. She had her back to me, her phone still clutched tightly in her hand, the screen casting a faint glow in the darkness. I knew she wasn't asleep, but I didn't say anything. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of silence between us. The next morning, I woke up to find Lisa already gone. She hadn't even left a note. She hadn't even kissed me goodbye, and that wasn't like her. Lisa always kissed me goodbye, no matter how early or late it was. That morning, though, there was just an emptiness to the house, as if she had rushed out without a second thought. I checked the time. She was already at the grind. I checked the app on my phone and saw she had already ordered her coffee. It was a bit strange that she was there so early, but I told myself it wasn't worth reading into. I had no proof. But the seed of doubt had been planted. I couldn't help but wonder, what was she doing there so early? Chris wasn't the only person who worked at the cafe. Lisa had mentioned a few other baristas, but it was Chris she seemed to talk about the most. It was Chris's name that came up in her stories, Chris who made her laugh, Chris who always knew how she liked her coffee. I'd always been able to shrug it off before. But now, it bothered me. That evening, I found myself outside the grind again, but this time, I wasn't there just for a coffee. I stood on the corner, watching through the window as Lisa walked in, her usual cheerful self. She didn't notice me, of course. Why would she? She was focused on the interaction with Chris, a little too focused, laughing at something he said as they exchanged pleasantries. I tried not to stare, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I watched as they talked for a bit longer than usual. When Lisa waved goodbye and turned to leave, Chris lingered at the counter, his eyes following her. Something twisted in my stomach. I told myself it was nothing. That it was just a friendly conversation. But something in me didn't buy it. The next day, Lisa came home late again. She was tired, like always, but there was something about the way she spoke that evening that was different. She seemed almost defensive. When I asked her how her day went, she gave me a quick, "Same as usual." But her tone was clipped, sharper than I was used to. She didn't ask me how my day had been, as she usually did. Instead, she excused herself to the bedroom to get some rest. I stood there for a moment, wondering if I had imagined it. I wanted to believe I was just overreacting. But every time I tried to push the thought from my mind, it came back, more persistent than ever. I began to notice other things. Little changes in her habits. She'd leave her phone in another room more often, and when I'd ask about it, she'd give a distracted answer, something vague about not needing it. Her social media presence, which was usually filled with photos and updates, grew sparse. She'd go quiet when I asked about her friends. She seemed distant, and no amount of "just tired" could explain it anymore. It was all starting to unravel. One night, I came home early, hoping to surprise her with dinner. But as I opened the door, I was greeted by the sight of her sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone with an unreadable look on her face. It wasn't unusual for her to be on her phone, but there was something off about the way she held it in her hands, the way her thumb hovered over the screen as if she were waiting for something. "What's up?" I asked casually, trying to act normal. "Nothing, just checking something," she replied, almost too quickly. But I didn't believe her. Something had shifted in the air between us, and now, there was no going back. The doubts that had been creeping in had settled into a quiet certainty. Lisa wasn't telling me the truth, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep pretending that everything was fine. I'm not sure when it all started to feel like a lie. Maybe it was that night I came home early and found Lisa sitting on the couch, her phone held tightly in her hands, her gaze fixed on the screen like she was reading something important enough to ignore me. I've never been one to pry, but in that moment, something in my gut told me to ask. "Who are you talking to?" Lisa jumped, startled by the question. "What?" "I'm just checking some emails," she said, quickly tucking the phone into her pocket. "Right," I muttered, but I didn't believe her. I didn't know what it was, but there was something about her reaction that felt off. It wasn't that I was suspicious of her reading emails. It was the way she tried to hide it, the way she was so quick to put it away. For the first time, I felt the full weight of what I'd been ignoring for the past few weeks. This wasn't just a series of small things anymore. This wasn't just my mind overthinking details. Lisa had been lying to me. And the worst part was, I couldn't figure out why. It's funny how the smallest things can reveal the biggest truths. That was the moment I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Something had shifted between us, and I wasn't sure how to fix it. The next day, when she was out running errands, I found her phone on the counter, still unlocked. I stared at it for a long time before making the decision to check it. I wasn't proud of it. I didn't want to betray her trust, but at that moment I felt desperate. I needed answers. I scrolled through her texts, my heart beating in my chest as I read through message after message. The conversations were innocent at first. Texts to her sister, some to her coworkers, small talk about the weather, upcoming plans. And then I found it. A text from Chris. I knew it was from him before I even saw the name. The tone of the messages was familiar. Too familiar. They were talking about things that had nothing to do with coffee or work. It was clear they had a private language, a closeness I hadn't known existed. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I've been thinking about you all day." I froze. I could feel my blood turning cold in my veins. My hand shook as I scrolled through more texts, each one more intimate than the last. The messages were filled with inside jokes, flirtations, and promises to meet up. My mind was racing, each word piercing me like a knife. The worst part? Lisa had been so careful. The texts weren't explicit, but there was a clear understanding between them, a connection I couldn't deny. I felt sick. My stomach churned with a cocktail of rage and heartbreak. All this time, I'd been oblivious. I'd seen the signs, but I hadn't wanted to believe them. Now, it was all there in black and white. There was no denying it anymore. Lisa had been having an affair. The next few days felt like I was walking through a fog. I kept going through the motions, work, dinner, sleep, but my mind was consumed by the thought of what I had found. Every time I saw Lisa, I tried to act normal. I kept my distance, trying to figure out what I should do next. The problem was, I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me wanted to confront her right there and then, demand the truth. Another part of me wanted to scream, to throw the phone in her face and let her see what she had done. But I held back. I wasn't sure if I was ready for what would come after the confrontation. That night, I came home late. Lisa was sitting in the living room, as usual. She didn't even acknowledge me when I walked in. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, her eyes briefly meeting mine before quickly looking away. "Hey," she replied, too casually. She was avoiding me. I could feel it. The tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife. I wanted to ask her about the texts. I wanted to tell her I knew everything. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "I've been thinking a lot about our marriage." Her face stiffened. "What do you mean?" she asked, sounding nervous. I ignored the question and pressed on. "I think we need to talk. We need to be honest with each other. About everything." Her smile faltered for just a second, and I saw a flash of guilt in her eyes. It was the first crack in the armor she had so carefully constructed. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice trembling. "Everything's fine." I felt my pulse quicken. It was too much to take. My heart was pounding in my chest. "No, Lisa. Everything is not fine. I know about you and Chris." Her face went white, and for the first time in weeks, I saw real fear in her eyes. The walls came down, and she was exposed, vulnerable and caught off guard. "It's not what you think," she said quickly, but I could hear the panic in her voice. "It's just, we've been talking, that's all. There's nothing to it." Her words were coming fast now, defensive and weak. But I knew the truth. I had seen it in the messages. She was lying to me, and I could hear the lies in every word she said. "I'm not stupid, Lisa," I spat, my voice trembling with anger. "I saw the texts. I saw everything. You've been lying to me for weeks. You've been seeing him behind my back, and I want to know why." Lisa looked at the floor, refusing to meet my gaze. For a moment, the silence between us was deafening. I felt like I was suffocating. My world was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Why? I asked again, my voice quieter this time, a mixture of disbelief and hurt. Why would you do this to me? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at her hands, clearly struggling to find the words. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. I don't know. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, but the excuse felt hollow. It just did. I didn't want to hurt you. I wanted to believe her. But the truth was right there in front of me. There was no excuse, no justification for what she had done. I don't understand, I said, my voice breaking. How could you do this? How could you lie to me like this? The tears came then, not from her, but from me. I couldn't stop them. I had trusted her. I had loved her with everything I had. And this betrayal, was too much to bear. I stood up and walked toward the door. I need some time, I said, my voice hoarse. I can't do this right now. Lisa didn't stop me. She didn't try to convince me otherwise. She just sat there silent, her face a mix of guilt and shame. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know if we could fix this. But I knew one thing for sure, everything had changed. The decision to follow Lisa felt like an impulse at first. I'd never been the jealous type, never one to invade her privacy or snoop. But after everything, the lies, the texts, the coldness in her voice, I couldn't help myself. I had to know. I had to see for myself if my suspicions were right. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a gut feeling that told me something more sinister was happening behind my back. I had been lying to myself, thinking that Lisa just needed space, that she was dealing with stress or that I was being overly paranoid. But when I looked at her, something was off. Something in the way she avoided my eyes, the way she hurried through her evening routines like she couldn't wait to get away, had started eating away at my trust. That night, she left after a quick dinner, telling me she was meeting some work colleagues for drinks. She was still wearing that smile, the one I'd come to recognize as the "I'm getting away with something" smile. It was subtle, but it was there. I barely said goodbye before she was out the door. I didn't even wait a full minute before I grabbed my keys and got in the car. She had been distant for weeks, always busy, and now I had the chance to follow her. This wasn't the first time she claimed to be going out, but I had to know the truth. I stayed far enough behind so she wouldn't notice me, my mind racing with possibilities. Was she really meeting her colleagues? Or was she meeting him? Chris. The barista. The guy whose name had haunted me for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was the reason Lisa had been pulling away. Something about him felt like a trigger for all the lies. We made our way through the city streets, winding past familiar places until we arrived at the Grind, the coffee shop where she had spent so much time. It had been a regular spot for us in the past, but now it felt like a place I couldn't bear to look at. The memories we had there, those sweet mornings with our coffees, talking about our plans, seemed so distant now, so hollow. I parked a block away, watching as Lisa walked into the cafe. She didn't even glance around, too busy checking her phone as she made her way through the door. I sat there for a moment, watching through the window. The soft, golden light of the cafe spilled out into the street, casting shadows across the sidewalk. It looked peaceful. Normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that inside, everything was far from it. After a few minutes, I saw Chris step behind the counter, and then there they were, both of them. Lisa and Chris. She was laughing too freely. He handed her a cup of something, their hands brushing in a way that wasn't just casual. It wasn't innocent. And that's when I knew. But I didn't rush in yet. Something kept me frozen in place, like I was trying to prepare myself for whatever was about to unfold. I couldn't just walk in and confront them without being sure. My chest was tight, my heart pounding in my throat. I needed to see more. I needed to see the truth for myself, no matter how much it hurt. A minute later, I saw them walk toward the back of the cafe, into the storage room that I knew had a small door leading to the pantry. The door swung open as they both passed through, and I felt my blood run cold. I couldn't see them anymore, but I could hear their voices. Their laughter. And then, silence. I waited, my hands gripping the steering wheel as my body tensed. The seconds felt like hours. Then, a muffled noise cut through the quiet of the street. A soft thud. The unmistakable sound of lips meeting. The world around me seemed to fall away as the realization hit me. They were kissing. My stomach churned. I barely had time to think before I jumped out of the car, adrenaline rushing through my veins. My legs carried me faster than I had planned. The door to the cafe was still ajar, and I could hear them inside. My breathing became shallow as I crept closer, moving as quietly as I could, my hands trembling with each step. I reached the door and pushed it open just enough to peek inside. What I saw nearly broke me. There they were, pressed up against the cold shelves of the pantry. Lisa's back was against the wall, and Chris was kissing her with a hunger I had never seen before. I watched in complete horror as she responded, her hands tangled in his hair, her body pressed against his. For a moment, time seemed to stop. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. This wasn't just a kiss. This was everything I had feared, everything I had doubted, but never truly accepted until now. They weren't just fooling around. They were making love right there, in the back of the coffee shop, where they had spent countless hours together. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything. But my body was frozen. All I could do was watch as Lisa, my wife, was with someone else, her arms wrapped around him like she belonged to him, and not me. I felt the tears well up, but I forced them back. I had to confront this. I couldn't just leave. I had to face her, face them. With a deep breath, I pushed open the door, this time with intent. It creaked loudly as it swung wide, and they both froze, pulling away from each other in shock. Lisa's face went pale as she turned toward me, and Chris scrambled to straighten himself up, looking at me like a deer caught in the headlights. The air in the room felt suffocating as I stood there, looking at them both. I could feel my chest constricting with a mixture of rage, betrayal, and heartbreak. "What the hell is going on?" My voice was rough, trembling, as I shouted at them both. "Is this what it was all along? You two? Behind my back?" Lisa opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stood there, staring at me, her face an unreadable mask of shock and guilt. "I can explain," she stammered, but I wasn't listening anymore. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't look at either of them. The scene before me was too much to bear. The love I had thought we shared, everything we had built, was shattered in that instant. I didn't know what to say. What could I say to someone who had betrayed me so thoroughly? Chris took a step back, his hands raised defensively. "Look, man, I didn't know." "Shut up!" I snapped, my anger boiling over. "This isn't about you. This is about her. This is about my wife lying to me, betraying me." Lisa's eyes were wide now, tears threatening to spill. "Please let me explain. It wasn't like—" "No!" I screamed, cutting her off. "There's nothing to explain. I saw everything. I followed you here. I saw you with him. You've been lying to me this whole time. Everything, Lisa. Everything was a lie." The words were out before I could stop them, and I felt the weight of their truth sink into my chest. This was the end. There was no going back. The cold air hit me hard as I stormed out of the grind. The moment I stepped outside, I felt like I was suffocating, the weight of the betrayal pressing on my chest. I didn't even know where I was going, didn't know what I was supposed to do. I had seen everything. I had heard everything. The intimacy between Lisa and Chris, the way she had clung to him, it was more than I could bear. I couldn't think straight. My mind was racing, my emotions in complete turmoil. I needed space, but I knew I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the fact that my wife, had been lying to me for months, betraying me in the most disgusting way possible. It was all too much. As I paced down the street, the harsh reality of what had just happened crashed into me like a freight train. She didn't even try to hide it. She didn't even seem guilty when I confronted her. All the things I had suspected were true. All the signs I had ignored, all the little hints that something was wrong, they had been leading up to this moment. I couldn't process it. I couldn't comprehend how Lisa, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, could have done this to me. Eventually, I made my way back to the cafe. I didn't know what I was hoping for. Maybe a confrontation with Lisa that would give me some clarity, or maybe just the opportunity to yell at her until my anger burned out. But when I walked through the door again, I saw her standing there, alone. Her eyes were red, her makeup smeared, and her hair was a mess. She looked fragile, like she was trying to hold herself together in the midst of everything falling apart. Chris was nowhere in sight. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was Lisa and the lies she had told. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice weak and trembling. "I didn't want you to find out this way. But I'm so sorry." I couldn't believe the words coming out of her mouth. She was sorry? After everything? After I had caught her red-handed in the back of the cafe, kissing another man, after everything that had been building up over the past few months, all the pieces falling into place, she was sorry? I took a step toward her, my fist clenched, fighting to keep the rage from consuming me. "Sorry?" I spat the word out like it was poison. "Sorry for what? For lying to me? For betraying me? For making me look like a fool every damn day I spent trusting you?" Lisa took a step back, looking around nervously as though she expected someone to intervene. "Please, just listen to me. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. It just happened. It just happened." I laughed bitterly, feeling the sting of her words like a slap to my face. "You think this was an accident? You think I'm that stupid? I've seen the way you've been with him. I've seen the way you've been sneaking around, lying about where you were, lying about who you were with. You think I didn't notice?" Her face twisted with guilt and frustration. "I was just trying to find something that I didn't have at home. I felt so lonely, so disconnected. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to ask for more, so I found someone who listened. Chris just made me feel like I mattered again. You've been so distant. So cold. I didn't know what else to do." I shook my head in disbelief. "So he made you feel like you mattered? He listened? What about me, Lisa? What about our marriage? What about us?" She wiped her eyes, but I wasn't looking at her anymore. I couldn't. Every word out of her mouth felt like another knife in my chest, each one twisting deeper as I stood there, completely shattered. "I was feeling neglected, okay?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You stopped paying attention to me. You were always working late. Always too tired. I tried to reach out, but you didn't want to talk. You weren't there for me when I needed you." That was the moment it hit me. Her justification. The excuse she had prepared for this moment. She was blaming me. She was blaming me for everything. I had always thought that we could work through anything. I thought that if something went wrong, if one of us felt disconnected, we would talk about it. We would fix it. But now, standing there listening to her try to turn this into my fault, I could barely contain my anger. "You're telling me that I'm the reason you cheated?" My voice was barely contained. "You think that because I worked late or because I didn't read your mind, that makes it okay for you to sleep with another man? That makes it okay for you to lie to me, to sneak around behind my back? You're unbelievable." Lisa opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "No. I'm done listening to your excuses. I've had enough. I don't know what I thought I saw in you anymore. I don't even recognize the person standing in front of me." Her face crumpled. She seemed to be trying to find the words, but they were stuck, tangled in the mess of lies and deceit. She wasn't sorry for me, she was sorry for herself. Sorry that she had been caught. I took a step back, shaking my head. "I gave you everything, Lisa. Everything I had. And this is how you repay me?" I could feel the anger burning inside me, a fury I had never experienced before. But underneath that anger, there was a sense of coldness. A detachment that scared me more than anything else. I had never felt so distant from her. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had trusted more than anything, was gone. And what remained was nothing but a stranger. The silence between us stretched on, thick with the weight of the truth. I didn't know what to say anymore. There was no coming back from this. There was no going back to how things were before. So, what now? I asked, my voice rough, bitter. What happens now, Lisa? I don't know, she said, her voice barely audible, like she was already defeated. I love you. I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't want to lose you. You already did, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. You've already lost me. I didn't wait for her to say anything else. I turned and walked out of the cafe, not even bothering to look back. I didn't need to. The image of her standing there, broken, guilty, was burned into my memory forever. The woman I had loved for years, the woman I had trusted with my heart, was gone. As I walked out into the cold night air, a bitter calm washed over me. I was done. There was no going back from this. There was no fixing what had been broken. I never thought I'd find myself here, standing on the edge of something so final, so irreversible. When I first met Lisa, everything felt easy. We fit together like pieces of a puzzle, two halves that made sense. But in the end, that puzzle shattered in the most painful way possible. What I had thought was love, what I had believed in so fiercely, was gone. The days after the confrontation were a blur. I didn't know where to go or what to do with myself. The house felt empty, silent in a way that made every room feel suffocating. I would wake up in the morning and for a brief moment, think everything was normal, only for the reality to hit me like a ton of bricks. She was gone. Everything she had promised, everything we had built together, was gone. I kept replaying the scene in the coffee shop in my head, the shock on her face, the desperation in her voice. And then, there was the anger, the heartbreak, the crushing realization that everything had been a lie. I didn't know who the woman standing before me was anymore. The woman I thought I knew was just a stranger, someone who had hidden their true intentions behind a mask of affection. I kept asking myself how I didn't see it sooner. How had I been so blind to the signs? The late nights, the texts she'd hidden, the way she'd looked at me with such indifference. She had been pulling away from me for so long, but I was too wrapped up in my own life, in my work, to notice. I had been neglecting her in my own way, though I never imagined it would lead to something like this. But the hardest part wasn't just the betrayal. It was the fact that I had allowed myself to love someone who could hurt me like this. I had trusted her completely, given her all of me, and she had taken it for granted. The wound cut deep, and I didn't know if I would ever fully heal. In the days that followed, I focused on putting one foot in front of the other. I didn't want to dwell on the past anymore. I couldn't afford to. I had to rebuild. Slowly, I started to get my life back together. I spent time with friends, with people who cared about me, and I began to find solace in their support. I started working out again, taking long walks, and reading books that had long been neglected on the shelf. For the first time in a long while, I focused on myself, on my own well-being. Lisa tried to reach out a few times. She sent me messages, left voicemails, and even showed up at my door. But each time, I refused to open up. I couldn't look at her anymore. She had broken something inside me that couldn't be repaired. The trust was gone. The love was gone. There was nothing left but the painful memories of what could have been. At some point, I realized that I had learned something valuable from this experience. The heart is a fragile thing, and it can be broken in ways you never expect. But the most important thing I learned was that I couldn't let someone else's betrayal define me. I couldn't let it define my worth or my future. If you're reading this and you've been in a similar situation, I have to tell you, trust your instincts. If something feels off, don't ignore it. Don't let fear or love blind you to the truth. If someone betrays you, it's not your fault. You didn't deserve it. The person who hurt you is the one who failed. And the only thing you can do now is focus on healing. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust someone the way I trusted Lisa. And maybe that's okay. Maybe trust has to be earned, not given freely. I've learned to guard my heart, but I've also learned that there's still hope, that there's still the possibility of finding real love. Love that's built on mutual respect, honesty, and care. For now, I'm focused on moving forward. Life goes on, and though the scars of betrayal will always be with me, they won't define me. I'm not the man I was before. I'm stronger, more cautious, but also more aware of my own worth. In the end, I'll look back on this chapter of my life and know that it was a turning point. A painful, devastating turning point. But a turning point nonetheless. So, to anyone who's been hurt, betrayed, or deceived, take your time to heal. Don't rush the process. And remember that, no matter how dark it gets, you have the power to move forward. Don't let someone else's lies break you. You are worth so much more than that. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.